suspect was reported to be last seen on the crime at 6:20 p.m. Yes, that's right, 26 years old, light brown hair, green eyes. Alright, copy. I'm so sorry. I have been working on that damn case for the past 48 hours with not much progress. Oh, no, please take a seat. Would you like some coffee? Here, let me pour you some. It's all I've been drinking, just coffees and... Well, I don't smoke anymore, but I used to, just a part of the job, but here. My partner told me you were here to learn a little bit about music criminology, is that right? And today, I'm going to be talking about the creepy story behind the book that was mysteriously connected to the unaliving of John Lennon. And that is none other than The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Is it Salinger or Salinger? You know what? I'm just gonna go with it. You know, I hadn't thought about John Lennon's death in a very long time. Probably a decade. Until recently, my parents, they're getting older, I'm getting older. My parents, they were like, you should try Apple TV Plus. Not sponsored. And I immediately noticed the new documentary, John Lennon, Murder Without a Trial. Before watching it, though, I decided to do a bit of my own research and came to learn that there was something a little bit odd about this case. The suspect, Mark David Chapman, was not only reading Catcher in the Rye when he was caught, but also allegedly believed that he was the main character of the book, Holden Caulfield. That was definitely a creepy thing to learn, and it made me want to know more about the book's connection to John Lennon and the murder. But first, let's talk a little bit about the book itself. Now, let me preface this by saying that I didn't actually properly read the book, Catcher in the Rye. I mean, I'm sure I probably read a few pages of it or parts of it for high school. It's vaguely familiar. Maybe in my high school English class, maybe, but I only have a vague recollection of it, so let me just catch you up to speed in case you also are on the same page as me. Catcher in the Rye was published in 1951. Its audience was initially intended to be a book for adults. However, it was, and still is, culturally significant for being one of the first books that described teenage angst and alienation from society, or in other words, just how much it can suck to be a young person. The novel follows 2 days in the life of Holden Caulfield, who is a 16-year-old who is expelled from prep school. He's confused and disillusioned by what he calls the phoniness of the adult world or society. It's interesting to note that the book's initial publisher actually thought that the main character, Holden Caulfield, was disturbed, and at the time of publication, the New Yorker magazine also thought that the novel was too shocking for a magazine like theirs, and critics were not amused with the content of the book, saying that it was not appropriate for children to read. Despite this initial criticism, The Catcher in the Rye is now frequently a part of many high school curriculums for students to read, which makes it very interesting considering it started off as being too shocking for children and too disturbing. However, even to this day, it seems to have a bit of a reputation, for a book that people either seem to love or hate. While the book could be interpreted as teenage rebellion, it could also be interpreted as a depiction of mental illness due to trauma and or abuse. So what we do know is that John Lennon's killer, Mark David Chapman, was weirdly obsessed with the book. Holden Caulfield's unending tirade on phoniness would have appealed to the post-war 1950s audience in suburban America. Well, it seemed to appeal to Chapman as well, who shot John Lennon on December 8th of 1980. And it's weird to think about how long ago that actually was. Chapman later claimed that he unalived Lennon because he was a phony. And I think, in a sense, Chapman felt himself to be the catcher in the rye of his generation. During the trial, Chapman even felt the need to cite the book to justify his motives. And on August 25th, 1981, he pleaded guilty to the murder and was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Chapman was only 26 years old when he shot John outside of his New York apartment building. However, there were a few conflicting aspects about Chapman's murder case. For example, Chapman was counseled to plead innocent by reason of insanity, but Chapman told Justice Dennis Edwards Jr. that God himself told him to plead guilty during the closed hearing, and Chapman appeared to be very aware of his actions, and he had clear intentions to commit the crime against Lennon. According to Assistant District Attorney Alan Sullivan, his motive was the desire to gain fame. However, defense attorney Marks disagreed and asked that the court show mercy, provide psychiatric treatment for Chapman, and for him to plead innocent for reason of insanity. Psychiatrists provided vivid testimonies of Chapman's mental health condition. He was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic with a narcissistic personality, and he suffered delusions as well as hallucinations. According to forensic psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Schwartz, Chapman had lived in an imaginary world since he was 9 or 10 years old, where Chapman ruled over an imaginary kingdom of little people, and he had extreme difficulty socializing or relaxing around his peers. Later in life, his delusions changed, but the strength of them remained. For example, at one point he believed that his brain was actually made up of 3 different computers. But what was the connection to the Beatles, and why John Lennon? So Chapman had actually been a fan of the Beatles, but he was supposedly angered by Lennon's luxurious lifestyle and his remarks about the Beatles being more popular than Jesus. Chapman recalled listening to Lennon's solo albums in the weeks leading up to the murder, and he stated that he was angry at Lennon for the lyrics sung in the song God, saying that Lennon doesn't believe in God, but just him and Yoko. So that rage, combined with the attitude that he gained from the book being anti-phoniness, likely led to the planning of Lennon's murder, combined with his mental health conditions at the time. And forensics described his plan to unalive Lennon as muddled, meaning his plan was not coldly calculated at all, but likely had no clear intention or meaning even to Chapman himself. So this tracks because his reasons for taking him out don't necessarily make logical sense, and at different times he has stated different motives. For example, him desiring fame, him being angry at Lennon, to him just desiring to unalive someone famous for reasons unknown beyond the fact that they were just famous. Later on though, Chapman actually denied that his actions were for fame, but rather the result of a psychotic episode where he believed that he wanted to promote the Catcher in the Rye to the public, and this lines up with forensics describing his plan as being muddled, considering he seems to have different motives depending on at what point in time you'd asked him. So, in an interview with journalist James R. Gaines, it was explained that Chapman could have and wanted to actually kill other targets such as Paul McCartney, Elizabeth Taylor, Johnny Carson, and even the then recently elected US President Ronald Reagan. So, the only thing his targets seemed to have in common were that they were well known or famous. David Bowie even noted in an interview that he was frightened because he was likely second on Chapman's hit list. This is where it gets interesting. On the morning of John Lennon's murder, December 8th, Chapman left personal items behind that he actually wanted the police to find, as in, he wanted to be found. In a copy of The Catcher in the Rye, he wrote, "This is my statement. and signed it Holden Caulfield, the main character. So he basically signed the book as if he was the main character and wanted it to be known that the book itself was his statement in the case. Allegedly, Chapman started planning the murder 3 months prior, which is a pretty lengthy period of time, and in the fall of 1980, he even confided in his wife named Gloria that he had an obsession to kill John Lennon, and even showed her the gun and bullets. Gloria, however, did not inform the police or mental health services, which was unfortunate. In the days leading up to the crime, he had an appointment to see a clinical psychologist, but he didn't make it to his appointment. December 8th, the day of the crime, Chapman spent most of the day near the entrance of the building where Lennon lived, called the Dakota. Chapman waited around the area, and at around 10:50 p.m., Lennon and Yoko returned to the building in a limousine. They exited the vehicle and walked by Chapman to the entrance archway, and from behind them, Chapman fired 5 hollow-point bullets from a .38 special revolver, 4 of which hit Lennon in the back and shoulder. So what was interesting about this case is that Chapman didn't run away or hide, but rather he remained on the scene of the crime and was found reading a copy of The Catcher in the Rye by New York City police. He was arrested without incident, and from this it seems like he wanted to be found and arrested. Since the wait time was too long for an ambulance, Lennon was actually rushed to Roosevelt Hospital in a police car, but was pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital's emergency. Chapman told the police, "I'm sure a big part of me is Holden Caulfield. The small part of me must be the devil." Yikes. So Mark David Chapman was charged with second-degree murder, and on February 8th of 1981, after an initial hearing, Chapman wrote a letter to the New York Times urging the public to read The Catcher in the Rye, saying that the book was astonishing. And The Catcher in the Rye has a connection to multiple other crime targets as well, which has made it gain interest by conspiracy theorists. And it's important to me that my channel speaks from a place of reason and truth to the best of my ability. However, it's interesting to note the conspiracy theories for the sake of entertainment and curiosity. Please, however, take these with a grain of salt. It's much more plausible that the book inspired killers because it has themes which would appeal to people who may be vulnerable to or struggling with their mental health to begin with, coupled with the state of post-war American minds when Catcher in the Rye was published. If you like this content, on my channel I talk about music, creative insights, and yes, music criminology, or the marrying of true crime with music and the art scene. So please like this video if this is something that you're into, subscribe to my channel, and you can even support me on Patreon or check out my music. I'm an independent artist. You can find me on streaming services or Bandcamp. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Take care as usual.